Our final panelist is David Reagan from Nova Southeastern University. For sake of time, he's going to shoot.
That's right. Forget about all that stuff on the Vita. It's an awesome individual. Very, very well-lived life, obviously. There are so many people who love Nate, and I really enjoyed hearing from people that worked directly with him. I did not. I know Nate as a friend and a colleague, and I was privileged to spend 11 really good years getting to know him. The kinds of recollections I have about him are, well, showing up at one of my band's gigs down by the beach, and he and Vicky dancing well past the time of the evening when folks of his advanced age should have been doing so. Taking a boat ride with me, and again, it's questionable whether anybody should be in my boat. It's really not seaworthy. They didn't care. Just an absolutely tremendous person, and you know, I hate to pile on the positive reinforcement bandwagon, but I have to share just a brief anecdote. We have a clinical competency exam, which Brad, I'm sure, is familiar with. They are of varying quality, and I had the occasion to sit in with Nate on one such examination, and it was of exceptionally poor quality. And Nate, being the chair, opened up with a 10-minute soliloquy about the virtues of this paper that was absolutely and completely astounding. And yet, and this is maybe perhaps we can have a little bit of discussion about this, after he was done, he did offer some, I would hesitate to say criticisms because it didn't sound that way, but they were very penetrating insights into the weaknesses of the document. But it was done in a way that I am extremely envious of. I've never been able to pull that off, and he was gifted in that way. But I wanted to share some of his other gifts, and so I purposely ripped off his mentor and decided to call this "On Having an Impact," a tribute to Nate. So let's talk about that impact. We've heard a lot about the lab. Let's talk about those efforts that were not so tightly controlled. 520 Amazon reviews of toilet training in less than a day. 70% of them give it 4 or 5 stars. 2 million copies sold. Number 9 Amazon rank in the children's health area. And they sell a lot of books on that Amazon. Rank 2,836. So enviable impact. But I wanted to share something with you that I thought was particularly touching, and I think really goes right to the heart of the kind of contribution that we all want to make with the people that we serve, the community that we live in, and I think it's beautifully encapsulated by an Amazon reviewer. And I call this How to Market Behavior Analysis via Amazon.com. I'll read it since it may be difficult for some of you to see, and it would be if I was out in the audience. I was skeptical about whether this book would work. My mother used it to toilet train me and my sister back in the 70s and recommended it highly. I tried training the traditional way first, following a suggestion in a magazine. I let my 2-year, 9-month-old son run around the house naked so he could get to the potty unencumbered. He kept peeing on the floor and crying. Eventually, when I asked him where he would pee, he said, on the floor. This is when I decided to use the book. I had some trouble getting my son to pay attention to me and follow instructions because he's very stubborn. He's not trained as well as the boy in the book. He needs to be taken to the potty. But he's not had an accident in 3 days, and I trained him 6 days ago. On reading the book, you may feel that the approach is cruel, as a reviewer I read earlier in the site did. However, you must be aware that everything is done in a positive way. The emphasis is on teaching your child, not humiliating them. Also, because the training process is so rapid, your child is spared the continued humiliation of having accidents, especially in public. And you are too. It took me 4 hours to train my son. And since then, he's been genuinely more happy and self-assured. Our relationship has improved immensely as well. This book taught me that I can be my son's teacher and that he can learn from me. It also taught me how to improve my interactions with him by following the suggestions for making sure he listens to and follows through on my instructions. This has significantly decreased the times when I get frustrated with him or yell at him for things unrelated to toilet training. This book was written to end the humiliation that most children go through before they are completely toilet trained. It's backed by research. It was originally designed for retarded children and can be successfully used on children with IQs as low as 30. I'm a licensed master social worker, and I would not hesitate to recommend this book to anyone, including my clients. And that's beautiful. It's beautiful on many levels, right? It communicates from the consumer exactly what they want from us. And Nate delivered that over and over and over again. And he had a method. And to me, that is why, as I was telling Vicki yesterday, that is why Nate will live, right? His work, his spirit will live a long, long time and will continue to do good well beyond what he's already accomplished, which is substantial. So I'm going to share with you about 8 minutes of video, maybe 7. It was done in an interview by John Lutzker. It was created by ABT in 2000 to preserve the thoughts and reminiscences of professional growth of the field's founders and pioneers. There are 2 clips, but they're back to back, so we won't have to stop. They talk about his animal work and its relationship to his clinical work, which is a nice segue from what we've heard so far. And then he talks a little bit about the development of the token economy. So I don't know how many of you have heard this. You can purchase this from ABT. For those of you that are teachers, instructors, college professors, it's some good stuff. So I highly recommend you get a copy of it. There are a couple quotes we won't hear. One is just a throw off, and if you're not paying attention, you won't catch it. But again, it fits beautifully with everything you guys have said. On the plus side, which is of course the only way a behaviorist looks at things, very contrary to the way many people view our field. And then on marketing behavior analysis, if it's good, you can't stop it. So with that, I might need a little help firing this up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's kind of.
That would be it. Okay,
Very much related to that, how important was your animal work in conceptualizing all of your life?
Oh, totally. In a general sense, it laid down general considerations, and then it standardized your procedures. When we set up an animal schedule of reinforcement, I was constantly checking the equipment. I didn't trust anything. I would be constantly looking in the animal chamber to see, and very often the lights would be blinking or something would be erratic. You never could trust the instrument. So I oddly enough, even though it was all instrumented.
Hold on, let's see if we can get the video.
Oh, there it is.
Hold on.
Physician in Anna State Hospital in Illinois. What attracted his
Orientation that he was opposed to or favored, and that was a psychiatrist. The superintendent of the hospital was a former general practice. That the response situation had a large effect. Or to put it in more lay terms, totally. In a general sense, it laid down general considerations, and then it standardized your procedures. When we set up an animal schedule of reinforcement, I was constantly checking the equipment. I didn't trust anything. I would be constantly looking in the animal chamber to see, and very often the lights would be blinking or something would be erratic. You never could trust the instrument. So I oddly enough, even though it was all instrumented, I had a window, one-way glass there in the animal chambers, and would constantly be looking in there to make sure that things were operating as they should. And then response specification, went to great lengths to try to select responses that could be objectively recorded, always quantification. You don't just say somebody's doing well or doing badly or he benefited. You give numbers so that you can express it. So, and in terms of experimental design, that whatever you use individually, with the individual subject design was there, the AB, that is no treatment, then treatment, to use the analogy with the human level. So these were the general considerations, but then there were the substantive things, and that is what were the principles of conditioning that we're talking about. And there, the enormous power of reinforcement. That was just amazing. I could take a pigeon, a naive pigeon just arrived from the animal supply, put him in the animal chamber, and I would time it. In 60 seconds, I would have him pecking away at a key, working away at a schedule. It was just so powerful. Things were so dramatic, and also at an extraordinarily high rate, as high a rate, 3 per second, 4 per second, for hours at a time. And so you could see the power of the procedure, but the basic principle being that of reinforcement, the type of reinforcement, the immediacy, the question of what stimuli was associated with, and most importantly as well as with its absence, because it turns out that took on aversive properties. That's where the whole notion of timeout came from. The schedule of the reinforcement, also what is it that aversive stimuli do, what is it that they're essential, and how do they compare with other operations. So all of those things were, so when I approached an applied problem, those are the things I thought of. What are the responses that are available for obtaining it? And what are the alternatives that can be taught? What are the responses that can compete with it, in other words? And in terms of aversive stimuli, found its effort. I had found that in the human engineering lab. And that effort itself was an aversive stimulus. You don't have to use shock. You don't have to use pain. The effort in itself is time out, just simply the absence of it. And so all of those things, so that some things occur in general issues, that is general methodology and the scientific orientation, empirical validation, not speculating about things without having the empirical validating or supporting evidence behind you. But in addition, these specific principles. And I ran them at the same time, as if I had a cutoff point. I had the animal work going at the same time. And you did too, didn't you? When you came to Southern Illinois University, did you have animal work going on?
That animal work had gone by then.
Oh, okay.
Now, you and Ted Ione at Anna State developed the token economy, which is used in families, schools, institutions. How did that come about?
That was wild. I was at a state hospital, and so there's obviously a population of patients there, but there was no pressure at all by the superintendent of the hospital to do anything with the patients. He left it entirely up to me, and so did the head of the research people in the state capitol. I was the editor of a journal of JAB. I was a chief editor, and one of the articles that I reviewed was by Ted Ione, and it was the behavioral. He was a psychiatric nurse, I think it was, as a behavioral engineer. It was applying rather simple reinforcement procedures to clinical type problems in the context of a chronic ward of mental hospital patients in Canada. I think it was Ted's dissertation. That was so impressive. I had already been doing some work with humans. I was working with stuttering, and with, but I read that. Isn't that fantastic? But rather than simply trying it out on individual clinical projects, how about doing it on a widespread basis? And the entire ward. And what that meant is really designing an entire society, because this is where people spend their life, and that is to try to create a society that would be maximally reinforcing of behavior that is pro-social and constructive and adaptive. So it was actually a Walden too. It was, how do you construct a society? It meant that you're faced with all kinds of problems. How do you individualize it so that individual preferences and desires will be there? How do you devise it so that the constructive behaviors that one needs in order to function in a society, in that particular society, would be there? And what could you do to go into that would mitigate against the symptomatic behavior? Well,
go on, but you get the idea. What Nate understood, that I think as a field, it's easy to forget. And it's less so here than it is perhaps at ABCT. But we still do find ourselves, I think, occasionally losing our way, because what Nate did, and I love what Brad said before, that you worked on a problem and you kept working on it until you got it right. And Nate said something in there that I thought was really striking. He said, I don't care about the experimental design didn't matter to him because he already knew that it worked. The game was rigged, right? They already knew the procedures worked before they tested them. That's something. Thank you.